Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to The Great Retention with Kamber Parker Bowden, sponsored by Generational Performance Solutions. I'm Kamber, founder and CEO of GPS, where we bring you strategies to cultivate a high-performing and committed team in a rapidly changing workforce. Whether you're looking to enhance cross-generational communication or navigate generational dynamics in the office, you've come to the right place. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Sheree Anne Kelly, President and CEO of the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, joining us from Washington, D.C. Today, ACCE represents over 10,000 chamber professionals worldwide, supporting their efforts to create strong workforces and robust economies in their cities. So obviously, you can all tell that this is a very important topic today. As someone who is very involved in the chamber world myself, from being a board member of my local chamber, the Greenville Chamber, and a speaker for dozens of chambers across the country, I'm really excited to be joined today by Sheree Anne to discuss the triumphs and challenges experienced by the ACCE, chambers, and local businesses across the world. Sheree Anne, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And the timing on this is great. Workforce and talent is the number one issue that chambers are facing across the country.
Yeah, it is. So let's dive right in. We're first going to get started with what we like to call the lightning round. So just in a few sentences or less, try to answer these next few questions. The first being, what is something that is not on your resume?
Mom to a dynamic 17-year-old. So I have all the fun of chasing him around. I spend a lot of time being a moober, as I call it, a mom moober.
Oh yeah, love that.
And of course, our 5-year-old mutt, Leo. He is 75 pounds of goofball and love. So that keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that answer. What is the best professional advice you've ever received from a mentor?
This is a good question. Always have something scary on your calendar. It stretches you, keeps you, always expanding your possibilities, thinking bigger, testing your own limits, building resilience. That's been one of the best things that has ever sort of sunk in for me. And I continue to do it to this day. The advice was given to me probably 20 years ago. Yeah, and I'm still following it now.
I really like that. I have not heard that before, but you're right. It stretches you. And I will remember that. I just wrote it down. Lastly, what is your favorite book, business or personal, that you have read in the past year?
Probably, I'm a big fan of Adam Grant. So he's got a book called Think Again. It's about how being wrong should be viewed as an opportunity to learn and not so much just a hit to your ego. I think just given the reactivity that we're seeing in the world now, if everybody could read this book, it would be a real advantage. It's about kind of reimagining what you thought was your viewpoint, not always being stuck in echo chambers, rethinking what you thought you knew. It's really, really great content.
Yeah, it is a great book. And definitely, I agree with you. If more people read that book, we'd probably be in a better place. Let's dive into your work at ACCE. You've been the president for 8 years now, right? 8 years.
That's correct.
And you led the organization through a global pandemic, economic instability, the introduction of AI into the workplace, and more. Wow, that's a lot. All of these events have greatly shaped many professionals' identities. Where are you seeing professionals, both on your own team and across the entire chamber world, looking to move and find work? And what does this tell you about their values compared to previous generational cycles, I should say, of workers?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we're seeing a lot of change really rapidly. I'll start with kind of generational changes. This is sort of the tale as old as time. A lot of people say, that they've said it before, that next generation, they just don't work hard enough. They don't get it. We hear this constantly. It's not true. One of the big things that I'm seeing is that the next generation of workers, they prioritize differently. They want more balance out of their life. They want, and this isn't a bad thing, right? To think about, how do I have, a work-life collaboration that doesn't feel so focused just on the work piece. In fact, I had a conversation yesterday with a really talented chamber leader in Kansas, and we were talking about how the next generation is sort of teaching our generation, I'm Gen X, to think a little bit differently about how we balance and value our work right now. So we're seeing a host of early retirements, people in their 50s saying, okay, This is sort of the end of the traditional career as I knew it. And even millennials in their 40s are taking sort of mid-career pauses. They're reevaluating, regrouping. So we're seeing that shift in careers. And then the next generation, they're also changing careers quite rapidly. So they might try something for a couple of years and then try on a whole new career. So when you're doing shifts in that sort of quick succession, you can't afford to wait and get a 4-year degree or an advanced degree in order to move in. So we're seeing a big shift towards upskilling and reskilling. So that's completely reshaping the talent community right now. Employers and chambers of commerce, right, are trying to build partnerships to figure out how do we skill our existing talent pipeline for the jobs that are available right now. So if you've got that kind of shifting mentality, organizations have to think differently about how long someone's going to stay within their organization, right? Having, a young professional stay with you for 3 or 4 years might be the most you can expect in a lot of circumstances. So that means onboarding's got to be a whole lot shorter than it used to be. And you have to get people up and running, skilled up, trained, and ready to go. But physically, where people are moving, a lot of folks are moving to where they can afford. Housing, income-aligned housing is a huge topic right now. All of the McMansions that boomers built aren't what younger professionals can afford, nor is it what they're looking for. So they're choosing this blend of affordability and lifestyle. Does a community offer arts and walkability and green space, hiking or biking, nature, right? All of these other topics. So we're seeing professionals moving and giving a lot more thought to where they're going to live and does it fit those different parameters that they're looking for. And then job-wise, especially with the next generation, they may be trying on different hats and shifting around in their careers, not sticking with one career or one job for a really long time.
Yeah, thank you. Such well-rounded response. I feel like you really covered a lot. And I know I threw a lot at you there in that question to kick things off. But let's shift to talk about the work that you're doing with chamber leaders. Okay, so you've talked kind of about just talent as a whole. What are you seeing and what has changed in your work with chamber leaders over the past 5 to 7 years, right? Like there's been a lot of change. So you've had to manage that change. You've also had to communicate your efforts and your initiatives with ACCE and then share that with all of the chambers that you work with. And I don't even know, how many chambers do you work with?
So we've got 1,600 member organizations, and that translates to a little more than 10,000 professionals in our scope.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a large chunk. So what are the things that you've noticed over the past 5 to 7 years with so much change and uncertainty?
Yeah, I think with all of this shifting dynamic, chambers are being called on to be thought leaders and partners. They're being asked to weigh in on bigger, more critical issues than they ever have before. So this can be things like mental health, crime, public safety, childcare, housing, even the opioid epidemic, because these are workforce and talent issues. They're community impact issues. Chambers have very high trust levels. In fact, we partnered with the Harris poll to ask about public perception of chambers of commerce. They have an incredibly strong reputation. In fact, 81% of U.S. adults believe that chambers are trusted partners and resources for business. So there's this existing level of trust. That's great, right?
That's great.
We love data like that.
Yeah, I love to hear that.
So when you have that much trust, people really want you engaged on these big issues. So that means chamber professionals have harder, more complex jobs that requires a different level of sort of nuanced leadership. There are a different set of skills that are needed right now. I mean, think about all the things you just mentioned in the 8 years that I've been on this job. Managing and leading your entire community through those kinds of seismic shifts are, that's a lot. It takes diplomacy. Resilience is something we're talking about a lot right now. We're working with Babson College. They refer to resilience as one of the key leadership skills for modern leadership. And I completely agree with that. So we're really thinking strategically about training for and hiring for resilience. You have to also just build trust in roles like this and build trust with people who disagree with you. You're going to have opposition on lots of issues that you engage on. How do you make sure you can still bring everybody to the table, especially in this polarized partisan world, so that you can have conversations and affect change and get to the root causes of a challenge and come up with some real solutions.
Yeah.
So the work is harder, but the rewards are greater. Right? You're building a stronger community. You're building those thriving economies. You're watching your work pay off.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing chambers really plugging into some of these deep topics, even things like civility. Given all of this social fragmentation, political fragmentation that we're experiencing, some chambers are figuring out, how do we cultivate civility among our chamber, among our employers, and among our community stakeholders, so that we can be more solutions focused. It's not that we're all going to agree on issues. How can we disagree better? So with that, chamber jobs are considerably more complex. The leadership style needs to be much more nuanced. And that focus on resilience is something that we're definitely seeing elevated.
Yeah. I loved hearing the 80% statistic, or 81% of people, trust chambers. I think that's great, because I just think of the chamber leadership that I know from across the country, Carlos Phillips being one of them, being right here in Greenville. And he has done a really great job, I think, of putting himself front and center of some major conversations taking place in our community in all of the areas that you've just touched on. I think of Natalie English in Wilmington, and they're putting themselves front and center. And I just think that is so reflective of what you've shared. They are being nuanced. Like, they know what's at stake, and they're getting themselves out there and communicating appropriately. So shout out to them if they're listening. But let's pivot to another stat that I thought was really interesting. I think back in 2022, 78% of local chamber respondents identified a lack of workers as a primary factor impacting their local economies, even when overall economic outlooks remained strong. All right. We see a lot of headlines like this in the news, featuring quotes from CEOs telling us what concerns them in the current corporate climate. Your work, though, is to uplift businesses of all sizes and strengthen local economies, as you've alluded to already. In your opinion, what are the biggest challenges faced by local businesses today? So within the regions that all of the 1,600 chambers are in, what are those challenges when it comes to attracting and retaining talent? So kind of shifting into this talent conversation, which is very much top of mind, as you've shared already. What would you say to that?
Well, there's no shortage of challenges. I'll lead with, there's a talent gap. There aren't enough workers for the jobs that we have available. So that makes talent attraction very challenging. And it's something that a lot of organizations and chambers are working on right now. How do we make sure that our jobs are structured in a way that attracts the right talent? How do we make sure our communities are the kinds of communities that are appealing to draw in that talent? Place-based marketing, place-based initiatives, those are things that we're seeing a lot of to really make sure, again, that people want to be in the community where the jobs are available. Then, of course, there's the skills gap. Skills-based training, upskilling, reskilling, all of those are areas that both employers and chambers are actively engaging on. We're also seeing an increase in skills-based hiring, which I think for a lot of organizations, relying on that traditional 4-year degree isn't essential for a lot of the positions and roles that are open. So we're seeing some unusual apprenticeships, not in your kind of standard industries that you've always had apprenticeships, internship opportunities. We're seeing engagement with younger and younger students in the K through 12 population to help expose them to talent opportunities, to career pathways within their market, but also getting them skilled up earlier so that they're ready to step into some of those roles. I think also just looking at the talent pool, there's a renewed focus on retention. And everyone realizes that it's much more expensive and time consuming to try to bring in and onboard a new individual into your organization. How do we make sure that we're retaining, particularly our top talent? So we're seeing a lot of things like burnout. Organizations really need to change their expectations of employees so that they can have that stronger retention rate. If employees feel like they're being invested in, supported, they have some balance, they've got professional development opportunities, there's advancement in the organization, that there's a culture that they feel like they're a part of. Those are all things that can help retain really strong staff. So I think that combination of factors are some of the places where business is really focusing their efforts.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that your point about retention is very spot on. What we see in our work is, as long as I've been doing this now for about 7 years, the pendulum always swings, and sometimes the efforts and energy are all on recruiting talent. And now it's the focus on retention and development of that talent, because to your point, it's really expensive to keep recruiting people. And it's not that one is more important than the other. You can't have one without the other, right? But retention and putting an effort on retention right now is so critical, because you need people because of that declining birth rate, because of the rise of entrepreneurship, because of people leaving the public and private sector for, influencer jobs or the creator economy. Like, things have changed and things are very different today. So finding talent is really hard. So you've got to keep the people that are in your workplace. So I just wanted to add on to that, because it's so important for our listeners to hear. There is a lot of talk about salaries and increased cost of living. You've already mentioned that people are going to places where they can actually afford. But professionals from all generations also yearn for purpose when looking for jobs. How do chambers attract talent and aid businesses by tapping into purpose and mission-driven motives?
It's a really good question. People want to be swept up in something bigger than themselves. I think this is true for all generations. It's particularly true for younger generations. I'm actually a very mission-focused person myself. So, being in this role is a perfect situation for me, right? We're helping chambers become stronger, so they're making their communities better, and we're literally watching the world become a better place in real time. It's pretty hard to find a job like that where you can see the fruits of your work and be supportive in an initiative like that. So chambers are just so well positioned to be able to capitalize on the fact that they're doing such incredible work. I mean, you're making your community a better place every day. And they can attract talent by really focusing on that piece, and also recognizing chambers are nonprofit organizations. So they can't match the same pay scale as, say, a corporate competitor, but they can structure policies and build a culture that really speaks to attracting and retaining some top talent. Some of the things that we've seen through research that employees are really looking for is flexibility. Now, I recognize that in lots of organizations, including chambers and other businesses alike, you can't always have complete flexibility, right? You're not necessarily going to be working from home 5 days a week. But where are the places that you can offer flexibility? Whether it's an occasional work from home day, flexibility in selecting the hours that you work, flexibility on what kinds of projects you can engage in. Flexibility takes a lot of forms, and a lot of professionals, they want some level of autonomy of how and when they deliver the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
Another place to be mindful about policies are, your benefits. Making sure you've got, strong healthcare and retirement benefits. For retirement, actually, at ACCE, we offer retirement benefits to chamber professionals because we recognize that, financial security for your future, that's something a lot of people worry about. So it's a place where making that investment can go a long way. But organizations and chambers are thinking about those, other types of benefits like mental health resources. We see organizations that have all kinds of support in that area. Professional development. People want to build skills that are going to help advance their careers over the long run. And frankly, chambers of commerce are a great place to get professional development for other businesses. Even the time off, what kinds of time off can you structure? Additional vacation time, extending holidays. A lot of chambers now close their offices between Christmas and New Year's. Places where you're saying, hey, we're going to collectively say, the organization isn't going to be working during this time so that you can spend that time with your family. Sabbaticals are making a comeback. We're seeing that
I've been
too.
hearing that.
Absolutely. So if you're with the organization for maybe 5 years, you get a 1 month sabbatical where you can, rest, recharge, and come back a little bit refueled. And when we're thinking about your culture, are all voices in your organization being heard? Traditionally, a lot of organizations had top-down power models where the leadership tells the employees what's going on. doesn't work anymore, right? Employees want to be part of bottom up power models. So are they a part of the strategic planning process, helping to drive the direction of the organization? Do they have a say in the major projects that you're working on? So I think the more a culture can have that entrepreneurial spirit, the better. And when you're thinking about local businesses, all of these same principles apply. Flexibility, benefits, culture. I mean, 76% of small businesses, the owners volunteer their time locally, and 63% make in-kind contributions to some sort of local investment. But they don't talk about that. And those are the kinds of things that people are drawn to, and they want to work for organizations that are like that. Yeah. So then, a local business can also offer professional development through their Chamber of Commerce. This is the perfect place, right, to get development for your team, and also sending your staff to get more of a sense of community. They can make friends, connections, build their own networks, and that gives them a sense of belonging in their market. So that helps your businesses with your employee retention, because you're engaging them in the chamber and they have a chance to grow. So I think all of that, it aligns for what chambers are thinking about, but it also for what local businesses are thinking about.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you answered the way you did, because I think it's really important to pause here and share with people, just how impactful, like we've already shared a few of the numbers, but you have 1,600 chambers, executives, right, that you are connected to. And then from there, thousands of local businesses that then stem within each of those executives and those organizations. So you are at your position, like you are making some really significant impact by giving them trends to pay attention to. All of the tips and tools you just shared, that's your legacy and the work that you're doing in your spot. So I think that's just really important for people to know, like just where you and your team, the impact that you have. So great work in what you're doing, but also in sharing what you just shared. I think it's really great tips and takeaways for people who are listening to this episode can take with them. Hey everyone, we're just taking a quick break from today's episode to give you a quick update. You've listened to the podcast. Maybe today's your first day. Maybe you've listened to it before, but are you ready to learn more? My new book, The Generational Advantage, which debuted at #1 on Amazon's HR and personnel management list, is officially available and full of insights on the generations currently in the workplace today. With this book, you'll gain a stronger data-driven understanding of generational values and how they impact your team, and what you can do to keep your team motivated, fulfilled, and productive, right? What's not to love? You're going to get a lot of value here. It's available for purchase now everywhere books are sold. So make sure you visit thegenerationaladvantage.com to learn more, or follow me on LinkedIn, Kamber Parker Bowden. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are once you order the book and read it, and just would love for you to kind of dive further and dive a little deeper into the conversations we have on the podcast. Thanks, everyone. Now let's get back to the show. Let's shift a little bit to the younger generation. So you've alluded to this a little bit already, and how, you're seeing some real-time change, and that's really exciting in your position. But what are you seeing in the next generation of talent from within your own organization first? So tell us, maybe what that looks like at the ACCE. And then how can the knowledge of younger leaders, how can that kind of fuel the future of work? And, kind of pair that with the question of where does the future go? What does it look like for the chamber world?
Well, it's a really fun question. And I'm not one of those people who is down on the next generation. I said, this has been the tale of all this time. But, when they're inspired, they're passionate, and they will give it their all. And I'm seeing that in my organization. I'm seeing that across other organizations as well. I mentioned they want balance. And again, that's not a bad thing. And when you create a culture that supports that kind of balance, they'll give you 110%, especially on projects where, again, they see that passion. Yeah. The next generation, they're bringing digital fluency. They're ready to leverage AI. They're already using it. They're comfortable using it. So this is a place where, it really gets everybody in an organization thinking differently about how to approach their work. They are a great representative of what the future of your organization and your customers and your stakeholders are going to look like. So again, having them engaged in those conversations about what are the products or services you're going to offer, they can help showcase exactly what that customer segment is going to be like, how they're going to react. So they're fantastic in that regard. They're ready to be upskilled. They're not stuck in one way of doing things. They're excited to, build their skill sets, learn new tools. They love leveraging tools for efficiency. So they can bring a lot of that mindset to the organization as well. Very purpose-driven, incredibly collaborative. In fact, that's something we've seen in my organization we've always focused on collaboration, but I think we've doubled down in that work over the last couple of years, or how can we have more cross-functional groups, really taking advantage of the skill sets and expertise that people are bringing from different departments. Very entrepreneurial thinking, which I think is a skill set everybody can learn from. And how do you train that entrepreneurial mindset to be as effective as possible in an organization? I think a lot of groups are thinking about that now. How do you test ideas on a small scale, iterate to get to a better end product? How do you fail small, right? And encourage failure so that people feel comfortable making mistakes? That's a fear lots of folks have. You can build a culture where you're not afraid to make those mistakes. You can leverage that next generation's entrepreneurial spirit for sure. I'd say there are two places. And it's not just what we've heard through chambers of commerce, but also in talking with thousands of business leaders across the country. Two places where there are skills that could be strengthened in the next generation. And so this is a great place for professional development for lots of teams out there. I'd say one is interpersonal relations and communication. I think oftentimes there's a reticence to pick up the phone, right, and have a one-on-one conversation. Phone calls are an underutilized mode of communication, especially if there's conflict, complex ideas, really encouraging people to have more of that in-person engagement. And when it comes to interpersonal relationships, things like how to read a room, conflict management, that's a big one. I think, right now, there's less comfort with giving and receiving feedback, managing through a conflict. I think those kinds of skills are essential, and they're places that there's growth opportunity. The second place where I think there's opportunity for development is critical thinking. So again, this fear of failure can sometimes hold people back if they don't have every detail shared with them or every step of a process explained before making a decision. It's, how do you analyze circumstances and ask the right questions to gain more insight? How do you iterate to problem solve? I think those two areas, the interpersonal relations and critical thinking skills, are places where there's a lot of chance for growth. I think employers tend to focus on the negatives of next generation, but, and you know this well, right? If you focus on strengths, train for the skills that might be needed, but really capturing the energy and the momentum that comes with that next generation, you can get some great things accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. And if it, I know you all have your research and we have our research. A lot of what you're saying just reflects everything that we preach. And so I just think, kudos to you that you're spreading that message to your leaders. And it's also really important to note here that there are so many more people. I mean, when I started this 7 years ago, this was like, what? Like young professional, we should be nice to young professionals. Like, now there's a different mindset. There's an openness, a curiosity, a general better awareness that leaders have. And so I would say that there's more and more leaders that do share your mindset and your beliefs on the next generation. But it's also really important that the next generation respects and views the senior leaders and the people who have kind of walked in their shoes, been there before. They need to treat them with respect and also look at them curiously. And so that's where this kind of two-way street comes in. And it's so critical for companies to understand that, because employers do tend to kind of look at the next generation, the new wave, as a little bit more negative, to your point and what you said. But again, you're sharing what needs to be shared with these executives, and then they're sharing that with their teams and then their investors and stakeholders.
And I think even mentoring relationships can be
it's
two-way also, right?
They have to.
Younger generation learns from the older, and the older learns from the younger. And that's, yes,
absolutely.
Perfect.
And when we talk about generations and how it kind of comes back to this conversation today, it is change management. When you understand how different generations operate, when you prepare not only for who's in the workforce today, but who's coming down the pipeline, and also who's been in the workforce, when you look at all three of those components, that is helping you be a better change management leader. And so one of my last questions for you is, what are your tips for change management, and how can business leaders ensure that they manage change while making sure no team members get left behind?
Oh, such a good question. Pretty much everything we do is change management.
Yeah, it is.
I would say you can't over communicate. So keeping that in mind, you want to make sure you're communicating regularly, reminding people of what's already been done, what's coming up, meeting people where they are, really having an understanding of what your team is feeling, where they're at in that change management continuum, how are they feeling? How can you make engagement a little bit easier? How can you make it so that your employees can plug in and find ways to ask questions, disagree with leadership, right? But places where they can feel safe to have a voice at the table. That really helps a lot when it comes to change management. Yeah. So a good example, one thing that my team shared with us was they said they really wanted more prompt questions before having a meeting. Mm-hmm. And this was a great, just small tip that helped make it easier for folks to feel like they could plug in. So if I came to the table and said, let's talk about the future of our organization. For some people, a question like that it gets them excited, but for others, it feels completely overwhelming. So how do you break it down so that it's more manageable? If you say, what are the top challenges you're hearing from our members? What problems do we keep encountering that we need to solve? What roadblocks are holding you back? It makes it just easier to digest. Mm-hmm. And then I'd say in general, with change management, addressing people's fears head on. I think a lot of leaders are reticent to just name it, right? Name the fear that they recognize is happening and start having really candid, direct conversations about what can and can't be done to mitigate that fear. Reassuring people that even you recognize that fear is taking place. I think the more straightforward and direct you are, in recognizing that there are things that are going to make people nervous, it just helps take the edge off of that. And it's kind of stating the obvious, but also addressing the elephant in the room. I think that helps a lot with changing big things within an organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And great tips there, and really strong takeaways that people can leave with after this episode today, which is always really important to me for our listeners. And you're just continuing to serve us with a lot of them. So thank you, Sheree Anne. As we wrap up today, in a moment, I'm going to ask you if there's anything else you want to share that you feel like we haven't covered yet today. But my last question for you is, in order for a city to prosper, you have to plan for everything. When you think about the future of the workplace, what do you think chambers should be planning for? So, we've been building to this question, but what should they be planning for 10 years, 20 years down the road? Because they have to be on their feet. They have to be quick on their feet. But what, if anything, is there left for them to do and to think about?
Yeah, there's plenty to think about. I get really excited about catalytic leadership. And that's where you're sort of the catalyst for change. It's building the future that you dream about. It's being less reactive and more proactive. So chambers and businesses, I love it when they sit down and co-create a vision for the future of their region. So it's getting your stakeholders together and getting them aligned about who do we want to be as a community, 20, 25, 30 years down the road, and how do we have to prepare ourselves to get there? It's kind of being futurists for your region. That gets me so excited because there's nobody better positioned to do that than chambers and the business community, because chambers sit at that intersection of business, government, community stakeholders, and the general population, right? So how do you bring everyone together and start to set that course for your future? Do we want our region to be known as an innovation corridor? Do we want a world-class education system? Do we want to be training the best future talent that we can train for this region, right? Not being passive, it's being much more proactive. I talked about the Harris poll and Chamber Trust, but the Edelman Trust Barometer also notes that business is the most trusted of all major institutions. So you've got chambers with huge trust. You've got business with huge trust. That's a lot of opportunity and momentum to affect some big change. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a moment for the business community. It's a moment for chambers. Mm-hmm. And we get the chance to kind of walk boldly into the future by taking advantage of that momentum. So that's what I get excited about for the future is how do we create the future that we want to see?
Yeah. What a great way to wrap up our episode today. Sheree Anne, is there anything else that you feel we didn't cover today or that you just want to leave our attendees or our participants with? Any final words?
I would, we covered a lot. So
we covered so much today.
Your thoughtful questions. If a business is listening to this podcast and you haven't engaged with your local chamber of commerce, I highly recommend reaching out. I think you'd be surprised, at the leadership role they're taking in the community, at the opportunities for you to engage. That's also something our Harris poll uncovered was that businesses that are members of chambers of commerce, the perception of those businesses goes up as well. Mm-hmm. So you get benefits, not only practical, tactical benefits from the training programs, events, and other opportunities the chamber offers, but your business now is seen in a different light by being part of the chamber. Your employees can take advantage through professional development, events, networking. So I just say they're a great partner for you. I just highly recommend that you reach out.
Yeah, and I echo all of those sentiments. The chamber has been very integral in me growing my business, and I just feel really fortunate that I got plugged in when I did. So I love to hear that there is real data surrounding the fact that there are so many benefits to joining a chamber. So join if you were listening and you are not plugged in already. Sheree Anne, thank you so much for such a great and rich conversation today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And for those of us listening or watching, thank you again for joining us on The Great Retention. Before you go, remember this. The generational landscape is shifting, as we discussed today, and today's workforce is not the same one we once knew. Our mission at GPS is to help you save time and money by identifying these shifts and demystifying generational differences through our keynotes, workshops, leadership programs, and workforce planning. Contact us today if you're interested in transforming your multi-generational team, and let's drive your business towards long-term sustainability and success. And last but not least, if you have not already ordered, make sure to check out my new book, The Generational Advantage, which just hit bookstores everywhere this week. Go ahead and check that out. Again, The Generational Advantage, how to lead, communicate, and drive performance across generations. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.